Good evening, everybody, and welcome to this week's version of Motormouth with me, Carly Brookfield, Chief Executive of Driving Instructors Association. I had to think then what I was doing tonight. I think it's because I'm just so overcome with being the rose in amongst all these thorns tonight. But I'm very pleased to speak to you tonight. It's a very topical Motormouth tonight because we're talking about the rising cost of fuel, given the crises that we're seeing in the Middle East and to some degree in Ukraine, and also, other cost of living increases that are compounding the cost of running a driving school and learning to drive. We're going to talk about if this was a time, if any, to look at with those rising costs, eco driving and promoting the teaching of that in a much bigger way than, if we're really honest, we think the sector actually has done. Is it time for trainers to switch to more sustainable energy sources for their vehicle, i.e., electric vehicles? Um, with all of that focus on eco driving and saving costs, I'm also going to throw into tonight's debate, what we're starting to see in the media a little bit around all that cost of living increase, a fuel crisis, creating that more kind of issues around that people are starting to push back on the cost of learning to drive at all. And we sort of Telegraph article this week, if you actually pay to get beyond their paywall, which is, ironic with them having an article about, the cost of learning to drive, but you have to actually pay them a cost to see the article and their opinion on that. So we're going to look at the topic as well of, pushing back on it's a cost to learn to drive versus investment. And it's an investment that's worth making. So it's quite a wide-ranging number of topics we're going to cover under that banner tonight, but I think it should make for a very interesting conversation. I'm going to introduce I'm not going to introduce because they're better at introducing themselves, the gentlemen that have joined me this evening. So I'm going to go straight to you, Tommy, in a moment. But just before I do, a little bit of housekeeping. If you've never attended one of our Motormouths before, just like our webinars, any questions that you have for any of the panel, put them in the Q&A box at the bottom. And as I'll be speaking less than these guys tonight, I'll be keeping an eye on that and fielding questions as we go. If you want to chat amongst yourself or make comments, put that in the chat so we can dance between the two and take what we need from each of them there as well. So off we go. Tommy, can you introduce yourself, please?
Yes, my name's Tommy Sandhu. I've been in the driving industry for about 22 years now. I own a school in Coventry. I also work for the TTC group, delivering speed awareness and managing some of their work and consulting for them. And I also do international driver training as well.
Keith, because you're just in my line of sight, if not everybody else is below, it's like celebrity squares as usual.
Hello, I'm Keith Lane. I've been an instructor in ADI for about 44 years. I've worked in very many countries worldwide on 5 continents. I've taught in 3 different universities. I've concentrated mostly on training driving instructors for all types of vehicles, from cars to lorries to buses, and all sorts of odd stuff as well, agricultural and so on. And I've also had the privilege to be able to train police in several countries and in military in 1 or 2 countries as well.
Graham?
Okay. Well, I'm head of driving instructor training for the Driving Instructors Association, but I've been banging around this industry for 30 years doing various things, mainly Cat B. I have done some LGV coaching in the past and run some LGV coaching workshops, but my main focus has always been developing driving instructors and developing driver training. So that's where I come from.
I think you've been a little bit modest. One would say that you're one of the driver coaching pioneers of the industry as well. So
I am a fan of coaching.
unusually modest for those who actually know him.
Yeah, I'm just a little plug. I have written a book, 20 chapters, and I'm now into chapter 10 of me rewrite because I didn't like the first one. I will get there eventually.
And Kevin, can you introduce yourself?
Yes, I've been an ADI for about 15 years and spent quite a lot of money on education, learning the stuff that the DVSA doesn't seem to care very much about. So yeah, that's me really. A bit of a compared to these other gentlemen, I'm a little bit of a non-entity.
You are not a non-entity at all, Kevin,
Hey,
at all.
you wait until we pick his brains. You're going to find out what a non-entity he isn't. Yeah.
Okay, so I'm going to start off the conversation with, some of the things that members have been talking to us about that they've been quite concerned about, and also we've had the media approaching us to ask us questions about what are members doing about the fuel issue, the fuel price hikes, the conflict in Iran causing these hikes. Now, BBC Newsbeat and ITV have been speaking to me this week and asking me, what members are planning to do. Are they planning to increase prices? Are they sitting out and waiting? Are they going to add a fuel surcharge? And we did actually survey members, and the majority were just sitting it out and waiting. So, gentlemen, has that been your experience in your training schools or talking to other ADIs and trainers?
Sit it out for the moment, see what happens.
I think we're the same. I think obviously with the initial news of it breaking and everything else, and it was going to be a very quick wrapped up product, and we're going to go back to normal. I think most of us decided it was going to be the sit out solution. But as it's now dragged out, it's now becoming a more costly effect for most driver instructors.
What I would like to say is don't forget that the government thus far has said nothing about its proposed 5p increase or replacing the 5p reduction in September. Now that is going to take diesel to over, assuming these costs continue, that's going to take diesel to over £2 a litre.
Yeah, and we have had some information sent to us. So members of DIA may be aware that we offer a fuel card at a reduced price for people to access it. And actually, at the start of this fuel crisis, I went to Moshe, the supplier, and asked them to make it free. So if you do want a fuel card at the moment through DIA, it is actually free for you to use. They've emailed us today, knowing we're having this webinar today, and just said that actually they've been made aware by their oil suppliers that the US plan to extend the block on the Strait of Hormuz, and that has resulted in the oil price rising very sharply yesterday, and that's going to be felt at the pumps very soon. So they're saying the prediction is there'll be an increase of around 8.47 price per litre on diesel and 6.61 on petrol for the next week. So their advice is, particularly if you've got a Moshe card, try and fill up your tanks before Sunday at midnight, where it'll start to hit the pumps in a big way, in most of them, or Saturday for Esso stations. So just a bit of advice on managing and mitigating these price hikes for you there. So yeah, so really people are just sitting out and waiting. But then, we've got that intelligence coming from the fuel supply industry there, that they're already saying with these extended, kind of blockades happening, we're going to see these prices continue to increase.
Carly, don't forget those figures that Moshe gave you are before VAT, so you've got to add 20% onto those numbers.
Yeah, yeah.
So what you're paying at the pump is going to become a real shocker.
Yeah, and given it's a core cost of running your businesses, then that's something that you've got to think about. What do you think is the best strategy, guys, as you're the ones at the coalface pricing lessons and training blocks to actual drivers? Is it better to have a temporary increase to overall pricing, or be clear with the public that it's a temporary fuel surcharge you're going to introduce, so they feel a little bit better that it might be a short-term thing and it's very obvious why they're paying you more?
It would appear to me that it would be reasonable for most ADIs to actually instigate a temporary surcharge just for as many weeks as necessary, and then assuming that the price drops again, they can then remove the surcharge as necessary. Basically, somebody has to pay for the fuel. It's either the ADI or the customer. And really, the customer pays for everything that the customer buys worldwide. So, unfortunately, in this case, it would appear that the customer has to bear the price, bear the cost of the rising cost of the fuel. However, Carly, you also mentioned fuel cards. I do believe that there's a certain advantage in ADIs having a fuel card to get a discount on every litre they buy. So that to me would seem quite worthwhile.
Yeah, particularly if you've got no cost on them at the moment. And Kevin, you mentioned that you've had this. I know this sounds like a big advert
Carly's
for that
internet.
particular brand, but we're grateful to them that they actually have dropped. Yeah. But Kevin, you were
I
mentioning that you've
do.
actually been using the motion card and find it
Oh,
quite useful.
I've been using the Motion card for ages. And I'm just trying to look up the last the last price announcement for this current week, um, and working out sorts of discounts possible because I actually filled the diesel car up today, um, which cost me just over £200.
Wow.
It's got a big tank and it was very empty. Um, but you look at it like that, even on a small tank, you're looking at a lot of money. So what I'm planning to do about this is I teach all my students eco driving anyway. Um, and so I think the way forward is to say, well, if you don't drive economically, I'm going to charge you extra for the fuel that you're burning.
Okay, I have an alternative plan to putting your price up. You could shorten your lesson times, because if you shorten your lesson times, so you're not actually inflicting a cost monetary on your client, but you could temporarily reduce the time that you're on the road, and
Which is
that would be a fuel
eco-efficient in
saving
itself.
in itself.
Yeah. What do people think about that? Does that sound like
Yeah.
a good idea, or do you feel like you're underservicing, even if you are, saving fuel, saving the environment a little bit more, and helping the pupil save cost? Is there that flip side that pupil feels a bit underserviced because they haven't got their full traditional hour or 2 hours?
Well, the cost per hour, cost per week would reduce, but the cost of learning to drive would not, because you're going to need more hours to make up for the shortfall. And in fact, when I used to teach learners about 300 years ago, uh, um, I only did intensive courses. My shortest lessons was 3 hours, and longer, sometimes full day lessons. And so that I wouldn't have been able to do that. However, I must admit I did live in a very rural area, and that makes a difference from being city based.
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
think
So I'm just going to dip in with a question, and I'm going to aim this at Tommy and Keith because you've got the most experience of training in the Middle East and things like that. And Diamond's quite involved in the oil and gas industry, as Keith will know because he's done delivered training for us over there. But Jenny's asking, how do we think Qatar leaving OPEC is going to impact prices? Is this going to be a further factor in pushing those prices up?
I was very pleased to hear that the other day. Was it yesterday I read it? And to me, that's very good news because going back a few decades, UK refused to join OPEC because it was considered an illegal or immoral organization. Obviously, it was mostly the Middle East, and one or two of the places were members, Venezuela, I believe. And so leaving that, I think, is a good sign. The other thing that I have read recently is UK gets very little fuel actually from the Middle East. We buy it from several other places, from USA, Canada, and yes, some comes from the US, from the Middle East. Most of the purchases from the Middle East are actually aviation jet fuel, which that is a problem for people who need to fly, but it shouldn't normally, in fact, impact the driving instructor at all.
Yeah, tell me about it. Some of my flights have trebled and doubled, so Ryanair's not quite as cheap as it used to be. But yeah, I mean, yeah, a lot of it's true. A lot of our fuel does actually come from the US. But until maybe Keir Starmer needs to be a little bit more Winston Churchill like, or Trump might not actually sell him any.
Mm. This ain't the first time we've had a fuel increase, though, have we? Because we've
True.
had the truck blockades before, where we ran out of fuel before. We've had this, so it's not something that we're dealing with for the very first time. So I remember the original, when we had the price increases because there were the blockades on the motorways and all that, and we did a surge system then, and it worked quite well. Where we, just like we said, we told people why. They
Hmm.
totally understood it because it was in the news and everyone kind of accepted it, and then we put a temporary surge in place, and people did accept it. They can see it's in the news, it's there every day, so it's not something we're kind of just doing. It's happening, and it's around the world as well, and it's affecting everything as well, from food. transportation of every type. So I
You give
think
me an excellent segue there, Tommy, to start talking about the other topic which we've pinned for tonight, which is, the increasing cost as far as the consumer sees it, cost
mm,
of learning to drive versus the investment case. Because we've seen in the media this week that the Telegraph has done a piece on the expense of learning to drive. Somebody's put an article on LinkedIn this evening about that, questioning it. It's becoming more and more of a pressure on those of you, particularly teaching learners, to justify cost. Then you've got parents throwing themselves into the mix, thinking that they can do the same job as you guys in a way that they would never walk into a sixth form unit, tap the teacher on the shoulder and say, "Don't worry, I'll take the A-level history class for the rest of this term." But it happens with our sector. So what and I don't think the industry has been very good at making the investment case, if we're really honest. Certainly we can't depend on DVSA to do that. We could do better, and I'm doing some work on that now in terms of campaigns for parents. But what are the Keith's been very good at summarising this, and you guys will as well, because you're having this constant conversation with clients and pupils. What is that investment case? How do we make that investment case smarter and more impactful? Because Tommy, you pulled out a key theme there about the surge pricing. Communication, isn't it? If you communicate to your customer, there's going to be a change in the service or product or the pricing, and they get it, and it's a pragmatic thing, they'll come along on the journey with you. And that the same applies with the investment case versus seeing it as a cost. So throwing that back to you, how do we make a better investment case for learning to drive?
I think the first thing is that, most parents will just teach them to drive. So it's that just so simple, get your gears in, move forward, backward, and pass a test. But it's that we also understand the behavioural and everything else that goes behind that of afterwards, and the death toll and everything else that works. So our job as probably driving kind of schools, driving instructors, is that bigger piece of what we do, the behavioural bit. And it's not just, like you say, people get into the car and, do the basics. It's about the booklets. It's the additional stuff that you give your pupils that parents won't be able to give. It's like, that we have booklets in our, the e-learning products, the other stuff that makes that whole encompass driving lesson a lot better product than just getting in the car and going, let's look and see.
I
Keith,
think
I'm going
that
to
if you look
unleash
at,
Keith in a minute because he's good on this one. I've heard him before on this one. He's very good. I asked him to write me an article on it, but go on, Graham.
I was going to say, I think we have to look at, part of that is what cars will the parents be driving? If you look at, because affording to teach your child to drive, I'm going to say that would be the more affluent, more likely to do that. And the cars that they're likely to be driving now are more likely to be EVs and hybrids. However, the cars that their offspring are going to be driving are more likely to be the old-fashioned combustion engine. So after the parents have finished teaching the children to drive in an EV or a hybrid, how screwed up will the kids be when they get by a petrol or diesel driven car? Bearing in mind that, we're the experts in fuel efficient driving. Also, if we're driving EVs or hybrids, are the parents going to be experts in the energy management of those vehicles? And I suppose the add-on to that is, do we need to up our game and understand EVs, ADAS systems, etc., more and more? Now, I'm going to just throw that in at Kevan, because Kev, yeah.
Before you go to that, I want to just
Okay.
let Keith rip on this because he did.
Okay, go on, Keith, then.
And then we'll go on to that one. I knew you'd messed with my agenda. Just
Sorry.
dabbling you, isn't it?
Can't help
So
it.
Keith, you're very good at this because we had a chat about this in another session, and that's why I asked you to write an article on it. Give us the Dragon's Den pitch on the cost versus the investment case for learning to drive.
Okay, very simply, I believe that learning to drive is incredibly cheap. It's possibly too cheap when you compare it with some other things. My first thought, I've looked around and you can compare it with many different things, product services that we buy. A simple one, everybody's got a mobile phone and everybody needs internet. And those two things together, learning to drive as a whole life cost, and we've got to look at the whole life cost. learning to drive, yes, we buy it over a period of months, but or whatever. But it only costs about 1/20th of what most or the average person might spend on a mobile phone and internet. That's how cheap it is. It really is cheap. However, a lot of the general public may not quite realize that. And that's why, obviously, parents teach their own children because they know that they can save some money, even though they can teach them some things, but we know they can't teach them everything. They just don't have the background knowledge and, in some cases, the skills to be able to teach what they think they can.
Yeah, and we often compare as well as a parent. I'm a parent of a teenager, and I know Tommy's been through the teenage years as well, where they every 5 seconds they've got a new hobby. So they'll want a music teacher, a football coach. They've got a new passion that they never turn into a concert pianist or a pro footballer. But we spent a lot of money trying to set them up in that. But kind of the cost of lessons is far less, especially if you average it over lifetime value, as you say, Keith, which I think is a very good way to look at it. The acquisition of that life skill has a bigger value to people, and yet the cost is lower than, in some cases, a set of driving lessons or what people are paying for a professional sporting coach on a
Yes,
regular
to
basis as
pick up
well.
on a couple of things you've said there, just learning to play musical instruments. A music teacher for a one-to-one lesson is probably going to be charging roughly double what a driving instructor charges, and and for very little outgoings, apart
Yeah.
from a tiny bit of advertising. Similar with horse riding. I mean, the other thing is that you might wonder, is there always going to be a need for driving instructors? Well, we've had horse riding instructors maybe for 1,000 years or several, and we still have horse riding instructors, even though there's less horses around. So I think there'll always be a case for needing some instructors, regardless of the actual number.
Tommy, are you finding, as well as parents pushing back, because you've got a foot in both camps of learner and the corporate, the fleet world as well, are you having pushback on pricing or doing training at all from your fleet customers, whether that's from a current crisis point of view or just in general, justifying ROI, return on investment for the training process?
Yeah, I think from a fleet element, most people will do it because it's legality. They have to do it because it's compliance and everything else. But you're right, it's a cost and it's an ever increasing cost. So they don't always want to do everything. So we'll go in and say, shall we look at the black box data or can we look at this and suggestive work? But they don't want to do it because it's a cost and they don't see a real return on it. But then you may get some clients who really understand, like Asda, for example, or somebody else, any of the food delivery companies that actually by being more eco and driving the van a lot safely and delivering companies, they will actually save fuel. And then you can turn it on its head. But it's that mindset. I think it's like most people think driving is a given right.
Mm.
We've all got to learn to drive, and it's the way we got it. It's a given. We don't talk about other industries like that. We don't get what's a given to play music, for example. So this is why people always think, well, everyone drives. What's the problem? So it's devalued for that reason. And parents think they can do it. It's a saying, like you said, it's a bit like cooking at home. Oh, we can cook, but that doesn't make you a chef, does it?
No,
So,
that's
so that's the concern, I think. It's that
and
understanding of, what the real value, the intrinsic value of what you're delivering for that child
I,
or fleet.
And I think there's the opportunity cost as well, and all the benefit losses and all those kind of things that you can weigh into it. But there's also the other costs that, fleet decision makers that they've had so much thrown at them about health and safety and tugging on the heartstrings. But actually, when I speak to fleet decision makers, and I don't talk about deaths and injuries,
Mm.
which they're expecting you to, and when you're going to do a road safety talk, and you actually talk about the cost of accidents in financial terms, they actually sit up and listen to those. I think there's a figure, isn't there, that for the cost of an accident within a fleet for just an average van driver will be something like 32,000 in terms of time off the road, the vehicle repair, any costs for the drivers, rehabilitation, training, all of those kind of things. And that's when you get the fleet decision maker, whether that's a CFO or a fleet trainer who's making decisions, actually paying a bit more attention because they know they're supposed to respond to the heartstring stuff of deaths and injuries, but it's almost hackneyed now. It's almost white noise. But when you start talking in tangible financial terms, why training can mitigate other costs within their business, like eco costs or the cost of a driver not being able to deliver because they're off the road because of an accident or damage to a vehicle, they get the investment case then, don't they?
Yeah, and that's exactly what we're saying is that when, especially now, if fuel costs is got high, you're still having your Asda or your Tesco delivery done. Most people are paid a subscription, it's free. That's now costing them a lot more. So they want you to come in and say, right, how do we mitigate that delivery cost as best we probably can? And that's where they then see the value in that kind of the training we do.
Michael asks us, what would we say, in your expert opinion on, because you're setting prices every day for lessons and I'm not, but what would you say is a fair price for an hourly lesson? He's in Aberdeenshire in Scotland. What's the national average now? According to the Working as a Driving Instructor survey, was it around about £38 an hour in the 2025 survey? So, would you guys think is a fair price for an hour's lesson in the modern, day of training?
I'd say
Well,
45.
okay. I looked into it a few weeks ago for doing that little report for you, Carly,
Yeah.
and I came to the conclusion that typical prices range from 35-ish as a rough minimum up to 55-ish in different parts of the country as a maximum. And it would appear to me that most things in this world, and including driving lessons within England, Scotland, Wales, etc., is based on supply and demand. And some customers will also be paying a little bit more for an instructor who considers themselves a little bit better in one way or another. That's a different matter to quantify, but certainly from town to town, the prices do vary. And it would appear that each town has got its own price range, or each area of the country has got its own price range.
I
Yeah.
think I'm going to coin one of Graham's fancy sayings of sales are for vanity and profit is for sanity. Because again, you may have somebody that charges £35, but their costs are lower because the car's cheaper or whatever. But you may have somebody that charges £55, but they're paying that higher cost fees, franchise fees, and everything else. So there is a massive disparity as well because just because everyone charges X doesn't mean everyone's taking home the same wage. If that
And some instructors fluctuate their pricing given and talk about supply and demand, time of day and week.
Yeah.
So Helen's saying she's in Surrey. I used to live in Reigate, Helen, so I know we pay more in Surrey for everything. But she charges £40 on the weekends on weekends, 45. She's making a surcharge for out of hours or unsociable hours, really, isn't it, on the weekends? So I think people have got the opportunity to set their own pricing given their local supply and demand, what they think the quality of their instruction is, and whether they want to make these fluctuations around unsociable hours or intensives or how many lessons they'll do at once. Because even if you're setting a higher unit price, you can also always make it more palatable to the client by doing deals and saying, look, yes, my hourly price is higher, but if you buy volume off and more volume off me, I'll do you a deal, which is great because it locks in that client, it locks in the pricing for a longer time.
Okay,
Silence you, or did you freeze on the screen?
a little bit.
I'm going to mention a client I was working with this week who, and this might upset Kev, because I know he's a fan of this, bought an EV 4 years ago. In 3 years, he paid off his vehicle by the amount of money he saved by switching to using an EV. Now, his profit margin now, his price range, he's got a lot more flexibility because he owns the vehicle outright. Kev, I know you're a real fan of EVs. Would you like to give your thoughts?
I'm in much the same position as he is. I own my own car outright as well.
Could you remind me how much it cost you to fill up your diesel car this week?
Yeah. Well, no, actually, I'm glad you asked you that question because the forecourt price at the BP station where I went to in Portsmouth was 188.9. I paid 166.8 on the fuel card.
And how much did that cost you out of your pocket?
An awful lot.
Well, do you want to give us a number?
Being coy. He's being very
I
coy now,
thought
isn't he?
I thought no, it took about hang on a minute. I can tell you exactly how much it took. Um, it took 115.89 liters.
Which cost you how much?
I've got to multiply that by 166,
I
but
reckon about 200, you see.
couple hundred quid. Yeah.
£200.
Okay.
So
Now,
is
if
it time now to switch to EV then, Kevin? Because I know you're going to have a robust argument. No.
well, first of all, I can't charge it. So that's that conversation over very quickly. I've got no. I live in a terraced house in the middle of Portsmouth. I can't charge it out here. We do have. I think there's a charging point. So there's one, two streets over, but that's always busy. So I suppose there are some charging points at B&Q. I could go and charge it there, but I've got far too used to
Okay.
pulling up at home, getting out of the car, and doing my thing.
The woman across the road from me runs it out of her kitchen window and plugs her car in on the street. Trip hazard maybe, but that's what she does.
Well, that's fine. That's going to be absolutely fine until somebody trips over it and smashes their kneecaps. And then she's going to be unhappy. Secondly, you're charging off a 13 amp plug. The charge rate will be incredibly slow, and we're talking, 13, 14 hours if you're down fairly low. Um, so I mean, as far as I'm concerned, they're a solution looking for a problem.
So what is
Um,
because you're not a massive fan of EVs, Kevin. We've spoken about this before.
yeah,
What's your there's a camp, and I know a friend of yours, Piers Corbyn, brother of the infamous, shall we say, Jeremy Corbyn,
Jeremy.
is very anti the EV revolution. What is the counter argument? So Graham's given a great argument in real terms, real life case study of an ADI that has switched, and a lot of ADIs are going to be thinking of switching at the moment, particularly with the fuel crisis, but we're thinking about it anyway. We're just nibbling around the edges of the idea, not quite taking the leap yet. What's the counter argument to all the good PR about EVs?
Right. Well, the government is going to be charging 3p a mile on your EV. You're going to be tracked absolutely everywhere. Every inch you move, government's going to be having is going to be keeping its beady eye on you. That is a huge disincentive as far as I'm concerned. Um, they're charging you 3p a mile. I did a calculation and I'm afraid I haven't got it written down. I haven't got it to head, but it worked out as actually being more that the tax being more expensive than the tax and duty on fuel, or certainly about the same price. Now, when you go into the hybrid, they're going to charge a hybrid a penny halfpenny a mile. That's just completely mad because they're not economic. Because the hybrid, everyone says, oh, but um, you're not paying any tax when you're driving around your petrol. Yes, we are. We're paying road fuel duty, we're paying VAT, and we're also paying vehicle excise duty, which used to call road tax. So I think these figures are going to be looked at very carefully, added to which second-hand value of EVs is not good. Nobody wants them second-hand because, what's it going to cost me to change the battery? 10 grand? Oh dear. So unless you buy stupidly, ridiculously cheaply, it isn't particularly viable.
So
Even if you're on a run, you got to park. I can't remember which set of service it was on the M25. I happened to be pulling in there to get something to eat, and it was miserable. It was cold and it was raining, and there was a queue of Teslas waiting to charge. Um, and some very, very unhappy looking people. They're going to be there for the next hour.
that
Mm.
technology is advancing. We've had in the last month the advent of a 7 minute charge, is it? From BYD. I mean, I'm going to refer to Tommy on this one because you spent a lot of time in the China market doing training, so you will have come across some of the more advanced EVs that are coming into production now from people like BYD. That drawback of EVs is changing.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, some of the stuff we talk about is probably prehistoric now when you go to some of these foreign countries where you really see the EV market rapidly growing. For example, most new cars now have a range of 400 miles. There's not many people who do 400 miles in a daily commute, shall we call that. Um, the kind of thing Kev was talking about, going home and having his time. Well, I've just been all the way to Derby, Nottingham. I've come literally home, plugged my car in, and walked up here. So I don't even have to go to the fuel station. I don't have to waste my time getting that kind of stuff. So the change in EV market is massively growing. It's in people like China, um, that 50% of the people out there drive EVs. They have a system where you can literally drive your vehicle into a pod. It unplugs your battery and puts your new battery back into the car without you even realizing, and you drive off within 2 minutes. I think they got it down to, and that's the kind of thing they're talking about.
Yeah, that's what I heard about last week. Yeah.
Yeah.
And
And then
I mean, it's not a
literally you
full
drive
charge
it
at that,
in
but
and underground, a battery comes off, a new battery goes in, takes 2 minutes. You can even get out of the car does it itself. So when we talk about, the lifespan of cars, well, it's not going to be true anymore because they can swap the battery over for you.
Yeah,
So technology's coming a long way now.
but I mean, we've got 33 million cars in the UK, and we haven't got a lot of space. So where are you going to put these things? These are going this is going to be a very expensive investment. The sheer cost of the batteries, just having batteries banked up, swapping out. It also assumes that all the batteries are exactly the same, and you can take, a bit like a double A battery, whether you put it in your toothbrush or whether you put it in a torch, it's going to fit. But cars don't work like that. And the other question about the 7 minute charging is, what was the power output of the charger?
So the new
Now,
That's
technology that
true.
we
The power output to fully charge a battery in 7 minutes, you're going to need something like a small electric substation,
you are.
one, to put that amount of power in.
You're looking at megawatt.
I see advantages and disadvantages. I see that uh, the sun shines beams enough power to the earth every day to match up more than all the earth consumption in electric, but it's harnessing it and it's putting it into batteries. That's the big problem. We all know that yes, you can charge your car overnight from a moderate power supply, but if you want it done in just minutes, you're going to need a massive flow of energy into there. Going to need really thick cables and a really thick power unit to do that.
A massive power station too,
Yes.
I
and then
think
which we haven't
obviously,
got.
I'd like to. The thing is, a challenge here is mindset.
mm,
The mindset is pure that we say we go to the fuel station and we fill our car up to the top. Now, yes, for certain people, that is absolutely true. For the general public, that probably go to work for 10 miles and back, they don't need that much. And we're carrying fuel that then becomes inefficient because it actually means that your car's you've got more drag and everything else. With electric, the mindset we have is how many miles do we actually need? We don't, how why do we need to put 400 miles in every time? Most
mm,
people will only need a couple of, like maybe even 40, 50 miles. If you can come home and replug your car at any time of the day within reason, you can just top up all the time. So it is a real different mindset having an electric vehicle to having a petrol vehicle. And I have both. When I have my petrol car, I'll just go to a petrol station, fill it to the top, and think, why am I doing this? I don't need all this fuel. I probably won't use it for 3 weeks. But when I drive my electric car, I think, oh, I need to go to here. I might plug it in. I'll even program the charger to say, make sure I've got X amount to make sure I've got enough charging for the car. And that's the key difference, I think, that people have got to change their mindset of how that works.
yeah.
And the batteries now, what you also got to remember is, I come from the 80s when the phones were this big, and
The
now how
Dom
big
Dom
are they?
size.
And
Yeah.
now how big are they? So as modern technology keeps creeping up and creeping up and creeping up, batteries are getting better. The chargings are getting better, and everything else. So if you're like me, you remember that big brick that you were carrying around that probably gave you two phone calls at the price of, a small mortgage. Now we have phones in our hands that can do so much more, and they don't need charging all the time. So we can see how we're evolving fast, if that makes sense.
Well, hang on a second. First of all, the energy
Yeah, and I
density of
think
the
obviously,
battery
go on, sorry,
is
Kevin.
absolutely ridiculous. You've got a 500 kilo battery to go as far as I need with 50 kilos of fossil fuel. So you've got that dead weight in the car, flat or fully charged all the time. So much so that the legislation has now changed for electric vans. You can go up to 4.25 tons. The unladen weight of the electric vans that the post office is using is out of sight. It's 2.2 something tons empty. Luckily, they don't have very much weight to do. But if you're a builder and you've got to put a ton of bricks in the back, you're not going to do it. So there's that.
Yeah.
Maybe you're lucky and you've got some off-road parking and you can plug in and you've got a charger, in which case, fantastic. I can't park outside my house most of the time. So even if there was a charger outside the house, I couldn't use it because somebody else is on it. Even if I was going to dangle a cord out the window and run the risk, and hope to God nobody trips over it, um, then that cord might have to be 100 yards long because I've got to park up the road. So this
Yeah.
only works in a limited sense of time. The energy required for a fast charging is absolutely huge. As Keith rightly pointed out, you're going to need a monster cable, and we haven't got the power generation. It's no good saying renewables will do it; they won't. Look what happened in Spain when the whole country went dark, and what happened there was a lack of inertia and
Yeah.
something tripped
And
out. There was
Portugal, don't
nothing
you
to keep it going.
forget?
Right?
And Portugal, don't you forget? I was actually
So, sorry?
driving from I was actually driving from Lisbon to Valencia that day. And
Yeah.
so Portugal got taken out because they're reliant on Spain's grid as well for the sustainable energy. So you weren't able to fill up because the pumps weren't able to operate even with petrol. So yeah, that is a drawback, of course. Helen also mentions that there's that cost of entry for the actual vehicle with
Yeah.
like a Kia Niro. If you wanted to swap that out to the electric version of a Kia, if you're driving that size of Kia at the moment, it's going to cost you 45,000. Though again, Tommy, in the China market, who obviously are storming away at electric vehicle production, you can get something like the Dolphin, which is about 18,000, and I think there's something like the Dacia Spring starts at 12,000 for their all electric vehicle as well. So I think it depends on if you go for the smaller ones, they are relatively cheap now and they're commoditized. But I think the other thing as well, you mentioned the point on batteries, regulation of the providers has been slow to catch up. So we saw that in the mobile communications world, that Apple for years made us buy stuff that we didn't want to buy, and we couldn't use other people's stuff with Apple products. But regulation came in that said, no, you can't keep doing that. I think they need to look at the regulation of batteries in particular and make sure it's more democratic so people aren't forced into buying unique, expensive ones for unique cars. You could possibly in the future swap batteries between cars.
So
Well,
BYD
the
is
best.
leading the way with that because they actually are creating a battery that they're willing to sell to other market tech. And that's quite, you see that when you go over there. And again, most of the new cars are being built via the phone companies like, Xiaomi's and some of the other tech companies because they've got the technology. So they
Yeah.
are sharing data, they are sharing technology as well.
Yeah. I'm going to move on to then up the electric car subject because this is something that is also very relevant to the fuel crisis and the rising cost of a core cost of driver training. As a sector, Graham, you can introduce this better because you tried to before, but then knocked you back in favour of the cost versus investment. The eco driving piece. Are we promoting eco driving in the way that we should do? And is now the time, if ever there was a time?
Well, like Carly, in my experience, the part two and the learner test allegedly, I say allegedly, has an eco section. I'm yet to really see it. I remember if we went back to Safed, Keith would remember Safed for vans and
Yes,
Safed
yes,
for,
yes.
for LGVs. And the government had a program of safe and fuel efficient driving. That never actually really transferred into our industry. And I think that was probably 20 years ago or more.
It was, yes.
And, I remember, having a lot of training involved in that. But I don't feel that it's been handed down through the generations to driving instructors. And look, if I look at driving lessons per se, and this won't be everyone, but driving lessons per se, it's around junctions, moving off and stopping, turning right at traffic lights, roundabouts. I do not see very much talk about eco driving. And bearing in mind we're in the middle of a crisis around fuel, why aren't we pushing that as part of our agenda to attract people who may be considering not to learn with us as the experts in fuel efficient driving? And I think now I've got my brain going, Carly, the problem is that in driver instructor training, in the majority, I don't think it's even mentioned.
No, it's not.
It's in the standards, though, isn't it? It
is in the standards, yes, and it's as it is in the Part 2 test.
The thing is that there are conflicts. Within eco driving. If you look at eco driving, unsafe driving, defensive driving, advanced driving, they're all different branches of the same thing, but some of them are quite contradictory to each other. And for example, just defensive driving, looking ahead, planning ahead, and planning your braking nice and early, so you're showing your brake lights early, that is contrary to eco driving. Because eco driving, you want to maintain a constant speed as much as possible. I mean, that's only one example. So when I'm driving myself, I do a mixture of a bit of this, a bit of that, a bit of something, a lot of defensive, some advanced, some eco, yes. And to me, life is a mixture of those four and more.
So, Keith, I agree with you. So, just to throw this one into the mix, because you mentioned that steady speed,
yes.
How much will ADAS systems play a part, or should play a part, in our drivers' training? You know, the cruise control, for example, I know that's crept into Part 2, but has it really crept in to teaching people to drive?
Probably not yet much, but it certainly could. I mean, as an example, if you like, I use cruise control. 90% of my driving anywhere, town, country, motorway, I mean, sometimes 99%, but even in town, I can use cruise control for most of the time.
And you obviously live in a rural area.
Well, even in rural areas, it can be used quite a lot. Obviously, there are hazards where you need to slow down and so on and so on. But obviously, it can't be used all the time, and that's the essence of knowing how to switch it on and off, and so on. But and teaching our learners that, or teaching instructors that, that's maybe an important detail that is often overlooked.
I mean, is that, you know, for people like myself who've been driving 50 years, is that switching, you know, the problem of switching from my feet to my thumb?
Yes.
Yeah, that's alien to lots of driving instructors who've been driving a long time, and confusing to them to switch to, and then cancelling and resuming.
Yes.
So it's a whole different skill set.
Yes, it is. I agree, it is.
It's a whole different skill set, but it shouldn't be an advanced skill set for an instructor, should it? It should be something that is absolutely integral to that baseline training.
I like the word shouldn't, Carly. That's yeah.
I think the problem is, like we said, is most instructors never got taught that because they probably have been taught 20 years ago. Now, when you ask them, it's a fear factor. I've never used that. I don't want to use it.
I don't like it.
I don't like it. Yeah, exactly. I don't like it. And then when we do advanced driver training and we kind of get them to do it, especially like Keith saying you've got the adaptive cruise in a motorway in scenario, or even a city environment where the car just literally creeps along, keeps a nice space, your fuel efficiency goes up, the stress levels go down, and they go, "Oh, I never seen, I never knew that my car did that." And then you kind of tell them, "Well, you paid for it, but you've never used it." It's
Yeah,
the
I've
same
paid
as
80 grand for this car
yeah.
and 75 grand of it I don't use.
Yeah, I don't
Yeah.
use. And it's the same with speed limiters. We're often saying speed awareness courses, do you use your speed limiter? How do you use it? Most people will turn around and say, I think I've got one. I've never used it.
Yeah.
And that's that concentration level and all that kind of thing. But it's just their fear of, I don't know how to use it. No one's ever trained me. And then if you think about now, the newer instructors that are coming on board that are not teaching the next generation, we're always going to be that kind of, we're never going to get to that point where people actually understand how to use ADAS features correctly.
So, Tommy, do you think, everyone, are we at risk that our training models are potentially rapidly becoming outdated?
Uh, Absolutely. Because the newer cars that are coming out, they have so much more tech. They've got massive amounts of tech that we deal with now. UK, we call it level two, is a very base model, the cruise control, the adaptive cruise, the lane assist. What's coming out now, what they're working on is more like level three, level four, where you got AI assistance, where the cars will actually talk to each other and tell them things and everything else. So, if we're not programming or training our instructors to understand this, they can't deliver them models. So you're absolutely right. We've got to do something to make sure that people understand the new product and
We
then can deliver it.
we did a conference a few years ago where we actually did a quiz on ADAS, asking people what things meant, and they could instructors, and they could tell me what the acronym meant, but
Mm.
they couldn't tell me about the pros and cons, the risks and the benefits. And if you're a teacher and it's something that your pupil is going to experience, it is a responsibility to upgrade your knowledge in those areas, because we've talked about kids having bangers and parents having hybrids. Actually, when it comes to ADAS technologies, that's a misnomer, because a lot of the bangers now are, the cars that are 5 to 10 years old, and they will have certain ADAS technology on them already. And even basic instructor favorites are now coming with ADAS technology on them as a baseline model. It's becoming a very commoditized thing. So it is a responsibility for trainers, whether they were trained by a guy who had a steam powered chitty chitty bang bang car as an instruction car way back in the when, or they just don't have a car that's that advanced. You will probably have all of that technology on your next lease or your next buy, and your pupils, as they you go along, will increasingly have cars with ADAS. So you are shortchanging and potentially causing safety issues for pupils, because the first time you drive in a car with all the whistles and bells, it's very distracting. Especially if you have nudges like you have on mine with lane assist, where it will shove you back into the lane, where you have the braking, which it will apply the brakes for you. And it's very jarring the first time it happens to you. You can lose your distraction being the biggest risk. You'll know this, Tommy, when you watch drivers doing this,
Yeah.
particularly in a fleet scenario when they're in more sophisticated models. It can really put them off for a moment when they first feel the car take over.
Yeah.
I
And the
sometimes feel
problem
I
is you
need a
get,
degree just to turn the radio on. Yeah.
yeah. And sometimes what you realize is, I was with somebody the other day and they turned off several of the features. And I said, why did you turn them off? Because I don't like them. But that doesn't mean I don't like them. And how am I ever going to learn them? Because now you're giving me your own experience. I'm just going to turn them off because we're not going to use them. That's not an answer that I was kind of like expecting. But it was their knowledge and their understanding of it, and that was then being parted on as a training model.
But as the case is built for how good that technology is at increasing
Apps.
safety, there's that override will go. The
Mm.
manufacturers, the regulation will hopefully catch up, and the manufacturers won't be allowed to put on an option to turn it off.
Mm.
So with Road Safe Foundation, a road safety charity that you may have come across, we actually created a guide to the main ADAS technologies, and it's called adashub.co.uk. It's very simple. And there's videos and there's images on there. It's designed for instructors to introduce their pupils to ADAS technologies. And the company that helped us validate a lot of that information is an ADAS testing company. So they're always offering to do days for ADIs to come along, because they have a rig where you can test a lot of ADAS on their rig. So I will try and arrange something where those who are interested maybe can go along and have a look at that rig and see ADAS technology being absolutely tested. I'm just conscious of time. I think we've covered off a lot tonight in the topics that we've done around eco-efficiency, around fuel pricing, around everything else. Is there anything else that the panel thinks, because fuel pricing is a zeitgeist topic, it's a hot topic, but is there anything else that the panel feels we should be discussing in the moment or should be the topic for the next Motormouth because it's a hot topic?
Well, eco driving, I teach all my lot eco driving right from the get-go. And the hook I use is that I changed the front brakes on my car, which I've had from new, at 96,000 miles. Most people are changing them at 30. Tires don't last that long, obviously, but I mean, my tire changes are relatively infrequent. So it's not, everyone focuses on fuel. It's not just the fuel. It's all the other bits. And yes, I mean, Keith is absolutely right. You're looking up the road, you're evaluating what's going on. There's a red traffic. I mean, how many people do you see? There's a red traffic light and they go roaring up to stamp on the anchors. Where the hell do you think you're going? It's red. Just roll up to it and it might change. You keep rolling.
Yeah.
Gently apply the brakes. They're often on little micro switches now rather than the rather less satisfactory hydraulic switches. Brake lights come on for the guy behind, so he knows you're slowing down. Just roll along. I teach all my people that to a greater or lesser extent. They take it on board and they do quite well.
Yeah.
Some don't, and I start charging them extra money.
It shouldn't be advanced training. And Diamond actually was the first of the advanced training brands to bring in eco training. IAM and Rosper followed, so I believe from the history. I've been told. But it shouldn't be an advanced driving technique.
No, not at all.
Do that. And
it should be core skills.
It also shouldn't be an advanced driving piece of driver education to talk about ADAS. These are the things that people need to gen up on. And I think sometimes in that passion to chase what becomes a trend in driver education, and people become very enamored, particularly the ones who set themselves up as gurus in that area, will tell you you've got to focus on this now. And it's actually possible if you're an educator to focus on more than one topic and be expert in more than one topic, because that's actually what people are paying you for, this expertise that goes across the range. So you can't just be an expert in driver coaching. You've got to be an expert on advanced driving techniques, on, to some degree in terms of the eco component and ADAS technologies and anything else that we think actually when they start driving on their own, they're buying their first car, and to make them good, efficient, safe drivers for life, this is the knowledge that I need to pass on to them. And have I got the sufficient level of knowledge to do a proper job as a trainer to leave them with that knowledge when they leave me?
Well, yeah, you're right. But then they've got to read the handbook, and the handbook's about 6 inches thick.
Yeah.
Who's going to read that? I don't like ADAS. I really don't. A few bits of it are really good. But I was traveling down a motorway in France, and a guy pulled out right in front of me. I had to put the brakes on quite quickly. Being France, the other fellow was right up my tail. Had it all nicely worked out, and the car suddenly thought, gosh, this is serious. You're not doing it right. This is how you put the brakes on. And that guy came to within a postage stamp of rear-ending me. It was all sorted out, all under control. I knew how far away he was, and the car took over. A hateful thing, and I would certainly turn it off. And if I ever bought a car like that, I'd find someone to program to get rid of all that stuff. I don't like it. I don't want it. I won't.
You're going to say
that's why I drive old cars. That and the fact if it breaks, God help you, but no one can fix it.
Tommy, you were going to.
But I think
I was just going to go the opposite way and say actually the education some of the ADAS features do, even for fleet drivers and everything else, is when you put the cruise on, they start to learn how much space they've got to leave. They've got to plan that journey much better, because otherwise it does break harder for you, everything else. And we know technology does go wrong, but so do humans. So again, it's that two-way process, isn't it?
Well, I'll give you a real life example of how to
technology on it. People come too long to it. They're just away with the fairies. I've got adaptive. I've got my lane control. So I sit and read a book. I don't concentrate on the rest of the time.
The newer cars, Kevin, they've got radars now where they look at your eyes. If you're not looking at the road, it actually will start telling you, right, you're not looking at the road carefully enough. We're going to slow or stop the car. So actually, all this mobile phone usage we have, that stops all that. Huh?
Yeah.
That would be brilliant on the M25.
You get told off. You get told off. It tells you, put your phone down. Do everything.
I think not my phone. It tells me off for scanning the road ahead. Keep your eyes on the road. You keep your eyes are not focused. And the car starts telling you off. Focus on the road ahead. Don't scan. Yeah.
Turn it off, Graham.
Well, in terms of
programming, get rid of it.
a turn of in terms of lane control and lane assist, a very real example of where it would have been useful. And I have to bow to those who actually train in bus and coach more so the Keith and the Tommies of this world. I was behind today in Crawley, a bus driver under instruction. And clearly, the driver trainer was not doing the job they should have been doing to keep that guy within the lanes, because he cut across me way more times than he actually needed to, even in training. You know, he could have been a very new driver. You've got to give him that allowance, but it was dangerous how much he was cutting into lanes. Now, if you'd have had lane assist technology, that it is a more visible and oral, as an AURAL, you know, warning to you, and it brings you up short that you have drifted. Whereas, you know, if you haven't got you're not always going to have a driver trainer, but you at least have that trainer in the cab of those warnings, and the car actually shifting back for you as well.
If the white lines are painted,
Yes.
most of them are worn away, so it doesn't work
Made
anyway.
a good point, because this happens quite a lot with the new technology, especially for us as driving instructors. She gets told to go and have a cup of tea by her car,
the cup of tea,
because and you know, think we're working all day in our vehicles. The vehicle will tell us to take a break and go and have a cup of tea.
Yeah.
Well,
on that note, I am going to wrap us all up so we can all go out for a cup of tea, have our tea, as we say up north, because tea is actually dinner for us Northerners, or a glass of wine, which is what I'm going to have as my dinner tonight. I've just a couple of things to remind people of whilst I've got the attention of people tonight. And we'll be sending out more communications on this. May the 11th is a very important.
Oh, she's frozen.
Whatever was very important is happening on May the 11th.
Impact or not, this is the entire not impact, because that's the deadline.
Carly.
So May the 11th is the
Carly, we lost
date.
everything.
Yeah. Okay, so can you hear me again now?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay. So May the 11th is the closing date for the minimum learning period consultation, the government consultation that has come out of the road safety strategy that is going to look at whether we should introduce a minimum learning period in the United Kingdom. Now, it's not just about minimum learning period in terms of hours or 6 months. The consultation actually asks whether we should introduce things like a modular learning to drive program, which obviously DIA has been trialing, Milestones, which is designed on those themes. There's a lot of chat at the moment. There's a lot of groups forming themselves to say, we'll be your representative, we'll be your voice on this. There is already a lot of work. I just want people to know, perhaps we haven't communicated it enough, though I did do a rundown to members the other day of every single meeting and activity we've been involved in March and April. There has been a roundtable. DIA was the only ADI association represented in that roundtable, because quite frankly, that's our job, to get us into those meetings. So if you're not in them and you're another ADI association, don't whine at me, go off and do your job and get your lot in that room as well. And we had a very, intense conversation about what MLP should look like, with Lillian Green, with the minister who presides over this particular consultation. I've also been advising on GDL in Northern Ireland recently, and Northern Ireland have asked for advice. The GDL scheme in Northern Ireland will include a minimum learning period, and what should that look like? They're still forming it, even though they're going to be bringing it in October, but they are very, very open to inputs from the driver training industry. So there can be this apathy at times with consultations. Well, what difference is it going to make? It will make a huge difference if the numbers are there and you're coming up with some good ideas, because some of the reasons that we've been able to do some of the projects we've been doing, like Milestones, and going and advising Northern Ireland on the first GDL scheme in the United Kingdom, and going and speaking to the minister, is because we've come up with some pitches, some dragon dens, some business cases, some good, sensible ideas, rather than just saying, oh, why weren't we in the conversation? Why wasn't I invited to that meeting? We get there because we come up with some solutions and some strategies. So it's not just about ticking some boxes and filling a survey in MLP consultation. It's also about giving some of your own ideas and thoughts to what MLP should actually look like. And you don't necessarily have to have a volume of people giving the same idea. Just one idea that is such a good business case for it is the thing that will stick in the minds of those reading the consultations, plucking those things out. So that's a reason to do it, as well as having driver trainers properly represented in these consultations. And I've banged on about this for every consultation that's happened in my time in the industry. If you don't take the opportunity to have your voice heard when you're offered it, you can't complain afterwards about the result of that. And, although we are small in number compared to the public who also get to respond to these consultations, we are there to be the loud voice saying, how are you going to weigh this balance with the expert trainer being listened to is smaller in volume and the public being larger, but they're more an expert, like we've been saying about the booking system consultation. So please, please, please do have your say in that consultation. There are a number of questions you're asked to answer, but also there is kind of free text area for you to give your ideas and your thoughts on what a minimum learning period should look like. There's questions around, as well as, do we introduce a modular learning device system and syllabus? Also, who should sign it off? When I was talking to Northern Ireland the other week, I was saying to them, we've got to do something about this. Parents and supervisory drivers signing things off. You can't have them signing off competencies because they're not able to spot whether a competency in driver training has actually been released. They can sign off whether somebody's done 4 hours of private practice on the road in terms of a time spent and whether they've covered roundabouts that day, but they can't sign off because they don't have the expertise that that's a competence achieved and that person is competent in that area. So we've got to be very careful about the role. So the more trainers that are going in there and saying either no, I think it actually should be exclusively the ADIs that sign off, competencies in minimum learning periods. Or what do we do about supervising drivers? That those are very important feedbacks from you guys as well. Going back to another consultation that was everybody thinks is a done deal and it's already been had, and that was a representative case of, well, what's the point of us responding anyway? They just ignore our voice. The booking platform consultation, we will be putting out a report next week which summarises some very deep concerns that we have around how that consultation was carried out. We've already highlighted some in our membership newsletters, and I've done videos about it as well. We've written to ministers about our concerns about how those consultations were actually carried out. We've also got some challenges to the way that DVSA actually carried out that consultation. So whilst making it illegal for an ADI to book a test in the booking system seems like a done deal, we are very much hoping that this report that we write, because it's got some very tangible examples of why that consultation was deeply flawed, may give MPs a pause for thought on voting through legislative changes that make illegal for an ADI to book a category B test, because once legislation is put in place, it's much harder to backpedal on that. Changing policy at DVSA level to not allow you to book a test is one thing, but changing legislation to make it illegal for an instructor to actually book a Cat B test, that's something that we need to be very careful about voting through. So consultations are important. The more of us that are there, the better. But even if there's lesser numbers, if you let them know or a good business case, they will listen to those, and that has been proven by some of the activities that DIA is involved in delivering some interventions in young driver, or at least trialing them, and ministers actually quote those. Log My Learning, which is a learner logbook that we did for Driver 2020 and put into trial, and Milestones project. You can still have your impact with one idea, one organisation, or one person. So that's a reason to respond to consultations as well. So that was just my soapbox moment on why May the 11th is so important. And channel as much as you can through your national associations. It's great. There's a real enthusiasm for people coming together and having working groups. But if you cannot get your outputs of your working group heard because you're not a recognised stakeholder, that could be work in vain, and you could be misleading those people you're trying to get on board that you're going to have a voice. So I've invited some of those working groups that have sprung up on this to come and speak to me, and I very much suggest you do, because we've got the loudest voice in the industry, and we can get in the right ears. There's not necessarily a guarantee that your working group can get to the people that they can hear, and I wouldn't want to see your work go to waste in that respect. And I'm very happy for us to be a channel to that. Anything anybody wants to add to what I've said there, or anything you think is really important for us to highlight whilst we've got people's ear?
I think it's important that we come together. I think that's the importance, and that we come together and our voices are heard. I think it would be very useful to, how shall I phrase it, to have a debate amongst the great and the good, and people get to put their points of view across from maybe these groups. That would be, because if they've set up groups, then they will have a certain amount of information. But I think it's a good place to debate, and then we can move forward with it in unity rather than a scattergun approach. Because if you throw enough mud at the wall, it will stick, but you will never cover the wall.
Yeah, Yeah, good point. And also coming up as well is a audit workshop, which Graham will be attending, and Tommy, I think you're going to that as well,
Yeah.
and a few other representatives for DIA. And again, I know there's working groups setting up to do pieces on what audit should look like in the future. So that's going to be an interesting discussion. So letting your national associations though have your views on that, rather than paying for somebody to represent you on a day's course in Coventry. It's free to come and let us know your views on audit and where that should be going forward. So engage in what you want to engage for, but also your national associations are there to be your voice on these important consultations as well. So let us know your views on MLP, respond to the MLP consultation individually. We'll look out for that report, because there's going to be some stuff in there that I don't think some people in the industry have even realised was deeply flawed about that consultation. There's some quite, unsettling stuff in there. And it's not about stopping DVSA finding remedies to the test waiting times issue and the booking system. It's about that note of caution about how we conduct consultations again, and how the agency conducts consultations again, and their transparency over how consultations are actually carried out. And let's have your views on, what changes should happen within audit and ADI training as well, because we can take them back to that workshop. Whether let Tommy know, let me know, let Graham know. It's making sure that you're putting those thoughts into the voices of people who will actually be in those important meetings. Great. Well, I'm going to let you go for a cup of tea, cup of wine, whatever you're having this evening. Thank you very much, everybody, for joining us. Thank you very much to my panel members as well for joining me tonight. Please let me know any other subjects, or Graham know, or Tommy know, anybody that you're talking to that we should be doing in Motormouth. We like them to be hot topics. We like them to be controversial if we can, and get a debate going on them. But yeah, please let us know what you'd like to hear us talk about, and we'll certainly put that on as our next Motormouth. So in the meantime, take care, everybody, and be safe out there.
Thank you.
Thank
Goodbye.
you.
Take care.
Bye.
Bye bye.